I haven't had one of these in a very long time. I'm not sure if it's because of climate change, but when I was younger it seemed like we used to get much more severe snowstorms than we do nowadays. Hell, when I was a kid I remember it being common in the winter for the snow to get so deep that I would sink down to my chest in it occasionally. But that doesn't seem to happen much nowadays. The year this happened we had one of the worst snowstorms that I can ever remember. I lived in a third floor apartment building when I was 19 years old. I had a job working in a video store, so imagine how long ago this had to have happened. I went to bed around 11 p.m. because I had to leave for work at 8 a.m. However, I was woken up around 6 a.m. by a phone call. It was my boss telling me that the store was going to be closed. When I asked him why, he told me to look out the window. When I did, I saw that it had snowed pretty heavily overnight. In fact, looking down at the parking lot, I couldn't even see my car. It was completely covered up. My boss told me that it was pretty likely that we might be closed up for a couple of days. It was still snowing when he called me, so who knew when it was going to stop. The first day was pretty nice. I just spent some time on AOL, which should also tell you how long ago this happened, talking in chat rooms. But the second day I began to get a little bit of cabin fever. The plows had been through a few times, but that didn't really help me too much. My car just got covered in more snow. The apartment building had done some shoveling and some salting, but they didn't do anything to get the cars uncovered. Fortunately, it continued snowing, which must have convinced my boss not to open up for the next few days, so at least I didn't have to make up excuses not to come into work. On the third evening, I was really starting to go a little stir-crazy. I needed something to get my mind off the fact that it had been 3 days since I had been out of my house. I couldn't really go anywhere as most of the town was still closed. However, when I looked online, I noticed something that really surprised me. This Chinese restaurant that I really liked was open and they were delivering, so I decided to get some food. I ordered the food and then tried to find something to watch for when it arrived. When the delivery guy showed up, I felt a little weird as he gave me the once-over. I mean, how unprofessional is that? I gave him money and a tip, but he questioned the amount of the tip. I found that weird because he wasn't complaining, but he insisted that I gave him too much. I tried explaining the tip to him, but it seems like he was deliberately not understanding in order to keep talking to me. It took a while, but I was finally able to pull away from the guy. I closed the door and went to eat my food. A very short while later, I heard a knock on the door. Looking out the keyhole, I saw it was the delivery guy again. When I asked if I could help him, he then asked if he could come in and use my phone. Apparently he needed to call his job because his car was getting trapped by the snow. This seemed very unlikely to me as it wasn't snowing and he'd only been there for a few moments. I offered to let him use my cell phone but told him I wasn't too keen on letting people I didn't know into my apartment. He insisted, telling me it would only be a moment. He didn't like cell phones and he told me he thought they caused brain cancer. I told him that it was the only option I was giving him. If he wanted, he could knock on someone else's door and see if they would let him in. I could tell he was irritated. He shuffled his feet for a while before walking down the hallway and out of my sight. I thought that was the end of it. About 5 minutes later, however, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from down the hallway. A few moments later, I heard someone pounding on my door. Shocked and scared, I grabbed my phone and called 911. I yelled at the man that I was calling the police. He pounded on the door a few more times but then was quiet. When the police came, I finally opened my door, and I noticed blood on it. Apparently what happened was he tried to get a neighbor of mine to come over and knock on my door to get it opened. She refused and he attacked her. Fortunately, the woman fought back and injured him enough to get her door closed. That was when he came back and pounded on my door. He never went back to that restaurant. Apparently he was a new employee and he had only been there a week. The police had a record on him. He was on parole from a rape charge he was convicted on. Of course, the Chinese restaurant hadn't done a background check on him or anything, as that wasn't completely common back then. He was picked up and went to jail. I like to hike in the winter. I know that seems really weird to some people, but it's actually not that weird at all to me. There are definitely advantages to hiking in the winter. Mostly I hate sweating, and I almost never sweat when I'm hiking in the wintertime. I mean, there are disadvantages as well. There's a lot of wildlife that you can't see because they are hibernating. Plus all the non-pine trees are completely bare. I've been hiking in the winter for a very long time. I still do it now despite a really scary experience I once had when I was a teenager. I just don't hike in that area that the experience happened in anymore. My parents got divorced when I was pretty young. I went to live with my mom in the city. However, a few times a year, I would go and stay with my dad. The year that this happened, I was on winter break from school. My parents decided it was okay that I spend the entire winter break with my dad. I was ecstatic, really. I mean, my dad of course did not get the entire winter off. We spent some time together during the holidays, but of course he had to go back to work and then I had to find ways to entertain myself. During the first week in January, I decided to go do some exploring. It was rather cold outside, but we really hadn't had much snow to speak of. I got bundled up as best as I could and left my dad a note, in case he got back before I did, and then I set out to go see some winter nature. I was having the time of my life for a few hours. I always liked seeing creeks when they got frozen. At one point I actually came across a frozen waterfall. If you have never seen something like that before, I hope you'll get the chance to. It was one of the neatest, most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. I was surprised when the snow started to fall though. At first I wasn't worried much and I figured it would just be a few flurries. However, it didn't take long before the snow started falling really hard. I was surprised because there wasn't very many times that there was snow at all in this area. And then the snow started to stick, and that worried me. I mean, I had hiking boots on, but still. The snow began piling up very, very fast, and in a very short time it would be very difficult to walk in, and I was a long way from home. As I trudged through the snow, I once again began getting concerned. It just felt harder and harder and my visibility became impaired. There was no way to orient myself because everything began to look like nothing but a bunch of white. I was really beginning to get worried, so I began looking for some shelter that I could use to wait out the storm. I was expecting maybe a cave or something. I felt very relieved, however, when I came across an old building. It wasn't huge, like a barn or anything. I guess it was just an old house. Although I think it was really weird to get to see such a place out here in the middle of nowhere. I tried to open the door and it was pretty solidly shut. I grabbed the handle, put my foot on the building and tried to pull the door open. Finally, I was able to pry it open. I went inside the small home and closed the door. I was positive the snowstorm would end. The inside of the building was really run down. I imagined that no one had been in there for a long time. I thought that I'd take the time and go explore it. I walked into the bedroom and stopped in shock. Lying on the bed was a human being, or what looked like a human being. It was skinny. Its skin was taut and sallow. It moved a bit when it saw me. Its back was hunched over. The person looked at me, and in the nastiest, weirdest voice, it told me to get out of its house. Fumbling out of bed, the creature made its way to its dresser, where there was a gun rack over it. I wanted to apologize for trespassing, but I didn't want to get shot by a hunchback either, so I quickly ran out of the room, knowing the decrepit person couldn't follow me. I ran back out into the blizzard. It was still a whiteout for the most part, but I didn't care. I wanted to get as far away from that strange little house as possible. It took me a very long time, but I did eventually make it home. I was cold and soaked from the snow, and it took me hours to feel comfortable again. I told my dad about what I saw, and he dismissed it. He said that there were some people who lived out in the hills and maybe the person was just malnourished. He told me I should avoid going into buildings when I am out hiking. I definitely will.